Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are jumping into a really fascinating body of research. It's this incredible confluence of cutting-edge neuropsychology and, well, centuries-old contemplative wisdom.
It really is. Our sources are basically a comprehensive guide to using your own mind to, quite literally, reshape your brain.
And I think a lot of you listening want that quick, deep knowledge. This dive is, in a way, a shortcut to understanding the actual neural pathways to happiness, to love, and to wisdom.
Exactly. For so long, science and, spirituality or religion have been in completely separate camps.
Right. Worlds apart.
But what's happening now, thanks to tools like fMRIs, is that we can scientifically chart the mechanisms behind these ancient practices. Our mission today is to distill the hard data that proves intentional awareness. It doesn't just manage your mind, it structurally and functionally alters your brain.
Offering a practical path.
A truly practical path, and one that is stripped entirely of any religious dogma or baggage.
Yeah.
Hashtag check iCuragami introduction and the revolution of neuroplasticity.
I just find this great confluence, as our sources call it, so compelling. In the Western tradition, you had science, which is all about objective third-person data.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had contemplative practices, which are entirely first-person subjective experiences, and never the twain shall meet.
Until now. What we're seeing today is this powerful collaboration where, neuroscientists are putting seasoned meditators into brain scanners. They're actually testing the claims of these ancient traditions.
Specifically Buddhist concepts, right? Things like mindfulness, compassion.
Mindfulness, compassion, self-regulation, yes. And they're using the most rigorous scientific methods available to do it.
And the findings are, well, they're not just interesting, they're incredibly strong. The core wisdom of self-inquiry, of ethical living, it's all being affirmed by hard data.
And the goal of this research isn't to prove one tradition right. It's to isolate these effective mechanisms and, provide them as secular testable tools for transforming your inner life.
But none of this conversation even gets off the ground unless we first acknowledge the single most revolutionary insight that underpins everything. Neuroplasticity. We have to start there.
Absolutely. Because for decades, the established view was that the adult brain was fixed. It was a static, finished product. Once you hit your 20s, that was it.
That view is just completely overturned now.
Completely. The adult brain remains profoundly open to change throughout your entire lifespan.
Which means that at any age, right now, you can fundamentally alter the pathways, the connections, the actual structures inside your skull.
Simply by shifting what you think and what you pay attention to.
It's still mind-blowing to me.
It is. But before we get to the how, we need a slightly more refined definition of the mind-brain system. When we say mind, we're not just talking about brain activity.
Right. It's more than that.
Much more. The working definition that this research offers is critical. The mind is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information.
Okay, let's break that down. Embodied and relational. That's a huge distinction.
It is. Embodied means the mind extends beyond your skull. It involves the entire nervous system, your gut, your heart, your whole body.
And relational.
Relational means it fundamentally relies on your connections to other people. It's an interactive system, not some isolated computer in your head.
And this leads to the big takeaway, the insight that gives us all agency.
The profound truth. You can use your mind to change your brain, how you focus your attention, the intention behind your thoughts. You can intentionally direct that flow of information to directly alter your brain's activity patterns.
And with repetition.
With repetition, you alter its physical structure. That is the definition of positive neuroplasticity in action.
To really get a sense of the potential here, we need to just pause for a second on the sheer physical scale of this system. We're talking about roughly 100 billion neurons.
It's a number that's almost impossible to really grasp. And those 100 billion neurons create a level of complexity that is, well, it's staggering. In the time it takes you to take a single breath, quadrillions of signals are transmitting through your nervous system.
Brilliance.
And the potential power of the brain. The number of different conscious states it can achieve is estimated to be 1 followed by 1 million zeros.
Okay, wait, we have to stop on that. 1 followed by 1 million zeros, so that's 10 to the millionth power.
10 to the millionth power.
For context, how do we even understand that number? The entire observable universe is estimated to have about 10 to the 80th power atoms.
Exactly. The number of potential conscious states in one human brain is exponentially, unimaginably larger than the number of atoms in the entire universe.
That's just, what does that even mean?
It's a number so large it's functionally meaningless in our daily lives, but it underscores one critical point. the potential for human experience, for unique thought and unique connection, for transformation. It is literally boundless.
It's no wonder the mind-brain problem is considered the most difficult scientific mystery we've ever faced.
It really is. One of our sources uses this great analogy. It compares understanding the mind-brain system to solving planetary motion. That process took 350 years, from Copernicus all the way to Einstein's refinements.
And if the goal isn't just to map the brain, but to understand conscious experience itself, we are very much in the early days of this scientific revolution.
Very early. And as you mentioned before, that relational aspect is just so vital.
Yeah.
Because the mind is relational, the brain is fundamentally a social organ.
Relationships aren't just like a nice to have for mental health.
They are foundational to brain health. Our social connections, our patterns of communication, they actively shape the neural connections that form the very structure of our brain.
So a balanced, compassionate brain it's deeply intertwined with having balanced, compassionate social interactions.
Exactly. Our capacity for empathy and connection isn't just some byproduct of intelligence. It's a necessary mechanism for brain balance and ultimately for survival.
And we can map all this now because of this unprecedented leap in knowledge we're seeing.
We have learned more about the brain in the last 20 years than in all of recorded history combined.
Mostly due to tools like functional MRIs, right?
Largely, yes. Non-invasive tools that let us see the brain in action.
And this speed of discovery gives us a very precise goal, this idea of positive neuroplasticity. We're trying to figure out how to deliberately internalize beneficial experiences.
A moment of gratitude, a feeling of safety, a successful effort.
And internalize them in a way that produces durable, structural, functional changes in the neural network.
It's the process of converting a transient mental state like that fleeting moment of calm you feel after a good cup of coffee into a neurally embedded trait.
A fundamental tendency toward resilience and tranquility that's just always there.
Always there, waiting to be accessed. That is the essence of rewiring your brain for well-being.
Okay, so we've established this incredible potential for change in the brain. But if our brains are so plastic and so powerful, why does suffering feel so constant, so ubiquitous?
A great question. And it turns out we have to look to our evolutionary past for the answer.
To diagnose the problem before we can cure it.
Precisely. We can borrow the Buddha's ancient framework here. Identify the ailment, which is suffering. Find the cause, which is craving and aversion. Know the cure, which is freedom. And apply the treatment, which is the path. We're just using modern science to put a neurobiological basis to that ancient diagnosis.
And the core diagnosis is that the neural architecture we've inherited, it was fantastic for ensuring our genes got passed on hundreds of thousands of years ago. But it's fundamentally flawed when it's being used by a conscious, complex, modern human brain.
Exactly. The brain is running on 3 outdated but very effective survival strategies. And these are the root cause of so much of the existential distress that characterizes modern life.
Okay, so what's the first flawed strategy?
The first one is the strategy of creating separations. The brain, specifically the parietal lobes in the upper back of your head, evolved to draw boundaries.
It had to, right?
It had to automatically establish the assumption, I am separate and independent from the rest of the world. This was essential for motor control, for survival, knowing where your hand ends and the poisonous snake begins.
Makes perfect sense as a survival mechanism. So where's the flaw?
The flaw is that, in reality, everything is connected and interdependent. You're constantly exchanging atoms with the air you breathe, the ground you walk on. You're literally made of stardust.
But the brain insists on these hard boundaries.
It insists on them. So our attempt to draw this artificial line between me and not me leads to fear, resistance, and suffering, especially when we confront the body's inevitable frailties, illness, aging, death. If the self is this separate, rigid thing, then any change feels like a profound violation.
I see. Okay, so that's the first one. What's the second flawed strategy?
The second is maintaining stability. Your brain is designed to keep thousands of internal systems, your temperature, your oxygen levels, blood sugar, in a delicate, healthy equilibrium, homeostasis.
Which is crucial for staying alive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the problem here is that everything in the universe is constantly changing. Nothing is stable. Our sources point out that even a single serotonin neuron empties its vesicles every few seconds.
So everything is in flux.
Everything is dynamic. And because of that, the brain is constantly producing these painful threat signals whenever that equilibrium is disturbed. It's like living at the edge of a raging waterfall and constantly trying to grab hold of the single drop of water that just passed you by. That grasping is painful.
And the third strategy is maybe the most relatable one.
It is. Approaching opportunities and avoiding threats. The old carrots and sticks. We chase pleasure and we run from pain.
Fundamental to survival.
And gene transmission, yes. But again, the complex human brain exaggerates the mechanism. The problem is simple. Pleasure is always fleeting, and many of the ultimate threats, like aging and death, are absolutely inescapable.
So the brain is always trying to hold on to the impossible or fight the inevitable.
Which guarantees a state of perpetual dissatisfaction.
And this inherent wiring flaw leads us directly to what the research calls the negativity bias. We are not designed for balanced perception. We're designed to survive. Sticks are always stronger than carrots.
Think about our ancestors on the savannah. If they missed a carrot, like a bush of berries, they usually had another chance to find food the next day. No big deal.
But if they missed a threat...
If they missed a threat of stick, like a predator in the tall grass, they were immediately dead. Game over. So, evolution prioritized threat detection and avoidance above all else.
And the result is a brain that is, as the analogy goes, like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones.
That analogy makes the mechanism so clear. You can have a generally positive day, but that one negative comment from your boss or one moment of irritation in traffic, it sticks so much harder and longer than the 5 or 10 moments of calm or happiness you also had.
Right.
And this means that your implicit memory, that unconscious foundation of what it feels like to be you, it just grows faster with negative content.
Which results in this sort of undeservedly glum or anxious background outlook. You're constantly scanning for problems, even when everything is objectively fine.
Exactly. Let's dig into the 6 specific ways the brain demonstrates this negativity bias in action, because they explain so much about modern anxiety.
Okay, what's the first?
First, there is chronic vigilance and anxiety. When you're not actively engaged in a task, your brain shifts into what's called the default mode network.
The DMN.
Right. And this network is often tracking your environment for potential threats, creating this persistent low-level hum of anxiety. It's a survival legacy. We evolved as creatures who were both prey and predator, and we haven't just turned that mechanism off because we're safe in our homes.
The alarm is always on, just in case.
It's always on simmer. Second, we have heightened sensitivity to negative information. We literally register bad news faster than good news.
I've heard that with facial expressions.
Yes. Fearful faces are perceived more rapidly than happy ones. Your amygdala, which is your brain's threat detection center, can process and react to danger cues even before that visual information reaches your conscious cortex.
So you're reacting before you even know what you're reacting to.
You are. The brain is hardwired to be drawn to bad news because bad news requires immediate action.
Okay, third.
Third is high-priority storage. Negative events get stored by the hippocampus with intense care for future reference. The system operates on the principle, once burned, twice shy. That's not a saying, it's a neurological imperative.
That memory has to be instantly retrievable because it might save your life next time.
It might. Fourth is that negative trumps positive. We see this so clearly in social science and relationship research.
The 5-to-1 ratio.
That's the one. It takes roughly 5 positive interactions, 5 moments of kindness, appreciation, connection, to overcome the neural and emotional effect of a single negative one. We are just motivated more by avoiding a loss than by acquiring a comparable gain.
What's the 5th way?
Fifth, lingering traces. Even if you intellectually process or unlearn a negative experience, an indelible, often unconscious trace remains in the brain, ready to be reactivated if a similar fear-provoking event occurs.
So you might not even consciously remember why you're anxious about something, but the trigger is still live in your nervous system.
Exactly. And finally, number 6, vicious cycles. The negativity bias doesn't just record things passively. It breeds pessimism. Negative experiences lead to catastrophic thinking and overreaction, which then guarantees more negative outcomes, which then fuels the cycle. It is self-reinforcing.
Wow. It's a pretty stacked deck against us.
It is. And the final piece of this diagnosis is what our sources call the suffering of simulation.
The mental movie.
The continuous mental movies, yes. Our highly developed prefrontal cortex excels at simulating past or future events. This was a huge evolutionary advantage. It let our ancestors predict outcomes and strengthen successful neural firing patterns without risking actual physical danger.
A huge advantage, but it comes at a tremendous cost to our current well-being.
A huge cost. First, the simulator is constantly pulling you out of the present moment. And real happiness, genuine wisdom, they only reside in direct experience, but the simulator insists you worry about the next thing or regret the last thing.
Second, the simulator often exaggerates pleasures that then disappoint in reality. We fantasize about how amazing that second cupcake will be, or the huge lasting satisfaction we'll get from a promotion.
And the reality of the reward is almost always milder and briefer than the simulation, which leads to this feeling of perpetual letdown.
Third, it creates these invisible cages.
Yes, the projected mini-movies are full of implicit, unexamined beliefs. If I try that, I'll fail. Of course, she'll react that way if I say this. These projections limit our future possibilities.
So we stay stuck in the life that's smaller than the one we could actually have.
Exactly. It's like a zoo animal that's released into a huge, beautiful park, but it still crouches within the confines of its old, invisible pen.
And maybe most tragically, by repeatedly replaying past upsets or forecasting exaggerated future threats, we are literally strengthening the painful neural associations. The simulator keeps the neural pathways of suffering active and reinforced. #Chag3, the second dart, and the physiology of stress.
So we've covered the first dart, that unavoidable pain of life, dictated by our evolutionary architecture. But now we have to address the second dart.
Which is the self-inflicted suffering. It's our reaction to the first dart.
Exactly. Contemplative traditions have said for millennia that most of our suffering comes not from the first dart, but from the second. It's fueled by what they call the three poisons. Greed, which is clinging to pleasure. Hatred, which is aversion to pain. And delusion, which is ignorance of how things really are.
And the irony is just profound. We often throw these second darts even when the first dart is neutral or even positive.
That's the crazy part. You get a compliment, and the first dart's a nice feeling of appreciation. But it's immediately followed by the second dart of anxiety. Oh, I'm not really that good. They'll find out I'm a fraud.
Or you achieve a goal. And the second dart is the fear of losing that achievement.
Right. What's crucial for this deep dive is understanding that this self-inflicted suffering is not abstract. It is deeply embodied. It happens through physical mechanisms.
The alphabet soup.
The alphabet soup of the sympathetic nervous system, SNS, and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, HPAA. And seeing suffering as this impersonal physical cascade helps us to depersonalize it and maybe stop throwing more darts in reaction to the darts we already threw.
Okay, so let's walk through that alarm sequence. A threat happens.
And remember, for the brain, a threat can be a physical one, like a loud noise, a social one, like rejection, or a purely psychological one, like a worrisome thought. It doesn't matter. It all triggers the amygdala, the brain's alarm center.
And once that alarm sounds, the chemical cascade starts almost instantly.
Within seconds, the thalamus signals the brainstem to release stimulating norepinephrine. The SNS immediately prepares your major organs and muscles for fight or flight.
Heart rate increases, pupils dilate, blood shunts to your big muscles.
All of that. And simultaneously, the hypothalamus prompts the pituitary and adrenal glands to release the primary stress hormones,
Epinephrine.
which is adrenaline and cortisol.
Adrenaline is that immediate surge of energy and alertness.
Yeah.
But cortisol, that's the one that causes the real long-term problems.
It is. Cortisol is the slower, longer-acting hormone. It's designed to suppress non-essential systems like immunity or digestion. But in the brain, cortisol kicks off a devastating, vicious cycle that characterizes chronic stress.
And that cycle is the key to understanding this.
It's the key. Cortisol revs up stress in two compounding ways. First, cortisol directly stimulates the amygdala further, which intensifies the whole SNS-HPAA activation, leading to more cortisol release.
Okay, so it fuels itself.
And second, and this is crucial, cortisol suppresses the hippocampus.
And why is suppressing the hippocampus so bad for stress regulation?
Because the hippocampus normally acts as the central brake on the amygdala. It's the part of the brain that says, hey, that threat is gone now. Stand down. It's okay.
So by suppressing the hippocampus, cortisol is basically taking the brakes off the entire stress response.
Exactly. This intensifies your emotions. It pushes your appraisal of ambiguous situations toward the negative, and it makes you much more volatile and reactive.
So this whole HPAA cascade was designed for a one-time encounter with a predator. But the modern experience is life on simmer.
Yes. We rarely face a charging lion, but we face an endless stream of digital threats, social pressures, financial worries, self-criticism, all second darts.
And this chronic low-grade activation is completely unnatural, evolutionarily speaking.
Completely. And it requires your body to continuously shunt resources away from long-term projects like cellular repair, digestion, immune function, or mood regulation.
And the physical and mental consequences are just staggering. Chronic stress raises the risk for metabolic issues like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular problems like heart attacks, ulcers.
Mentally, it sensitizes the amygdala, which intensifies trait anxiety. That's a constant state of anxiety, regardless of the situation. And it increases your vulnerability to blue mood or depression because chronic stress severely reduces the availability of serotonin, our most important mood-stabilizing neurotransmitter.
So if the SNS is the fire alarm and the HPAA is the accelerant, we need to learn how to deploy the body's fire department.
Which is the parasympathetic nervous system, PNS, the rest and digest system.
And the goal here isn't to eliminate the SNS entirely, right? We need some of that activation for vitality and enthusiasm.
That's a great point. The optimal state, the peak performance zone, is mainly PNS arousal for a baseline of ease, with some mild SNS activity for energy and only occasional necessary spikes for real emergencies.
The PNS conserves energy, it maintains equilibrium, and it fosters deep tranquility.
And the SNS and PNS are connected like a seesaw. If you consciously push down on the PNS side, the SNS side has to come up. So we need practical, simple methods to deliberately push that PNS side down.
Let's start with the absolute simplest intervention, breathing.
When you take a deep, full inhalation and follow it with a slow, long exhalation, you are physically forcing the activation of the calming PNS. The vagus nerve, which is a major PNS pathway, is stimulated when we slow and deepen our breathing, especially the exhale.
So just extending your out-breath by 1 or 2 seconds.
It sends a powerful signal of safety directly to your brainstem. It's that simple.
What about physical cues?
Touching the lips is surprisingly effective. There's a high concentration of parasympathetic fibers throughout your lips, and just touching them can trigger soothing associations and a slight shift toward calm. Also, conscious relaxation of big muscle groups, dropping your shoulders, unclenching your jaw, that drains away the stored physical tension that fuels anxiety.
And mentally, what can we do with our minds?
Mindfulness of the body is a key one. Just bringing your attention inward, away from that verbal simulator, to simple, non-judgmental sensations. The feeling of the breath in your belly, the feeling of your feet on the floor that activates parasympathetic networks and grounds you in the safety of the present moment.
And imagery, too.
Yes, imagery, like visualizing a peaceful mountain lake. That tends to activate the right hemisphere's holistic processing centers, which helps to quiet the overly chatty, anxious verbal centers of the left hemisphere.
You also mentioned a way to directly balance the heartbeat, which I find fascinating, the heart rate variability, HRV technique.
Yes, HRV is a great measure of your autonomic nervous system's activity. When you're stressed, your HRV decreases, your heartbeat becomes rigid, less flexible.
And we can consciously improve that.
We can. The technique, often taught by groups like HeartMath, involves 3 steps. First, you breathe with equal duration for the inhale and the exhale, say 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out.
Okay, rhythmic breathing.
Second, you imagine or sense that breath moving in and out through the area of your heart.
And the third step seems to be the one that connects the physical and the emotional.
It is. The third step is to evoke a pleasant, heartfelt emotion. Gratitude, kindness, appreciation for someone or something. You hold that feeling while you're doing the rhythmic breathing.
And this combination actually changes your physiology.
Significantly. This combination of rhythmic breathing and positive emotion has been shown to significantly increase HRV, which is clinically associated with decreased stress, improved executive function, and better overall cardiovascular health. It's an incredibly powerful tool to immediately shift the balance toward PNS dominance. #Chag5V. Rewiring the brain for happiness and love.
So we've established the brain is Velcro for the negative. If we want to change that baseline, we need a conscious intervention. We have to override that Teflon Velcro effect.
Absolutely. This brings us right back to the power of positive neuroplasticity. The goal is to alter that implicit memory, the unconscious residue of experience that dictates our outlook on life.
Because the negativity bias is constantly piling up the negative implicit memories, we have to consciously step in and build a positive base.
We have to. We need to intentionally make beneficial experiences prominent and intense in our awareness to successfully internalize them. We're literally replacing old, painful neural pathways with new ones, synapse by synapse.
And this is where the 3-step framework for taking in the good, or HEAL, comes in. It's designed specifically to convert those fleeting good moments into durable neural traits.
And step 1 is crucial, because we often miss it entirely. You have to turn a positive fact into a positive experience.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, we might acknowledge a fact, like that was a successful meeting, but we move on immediately. To make it an experience, you have to pause. You have to notice the simple good moments, a genuine compliment, finishing a task, a beautiful sunset, and actually allow yourself to feel them.
Okay, so you feel it. Then step 2 is where the actual rewiring begins to happen.
Step 2. Savor the experience. You must intentionally hold that positive experience in your awareness for 5, 10, ideally 20 seconds or more.
And focus on what, specifically?
The sources emphasize focusing on the emotions and the body sensations, because emotions and body states are the very language of implicit memory. The longer you hold it, the more the associated neurons fire together and start to wire together.
And there's a chemical component to this too, right?
Yes, focusing on rewards increases dopamine release. And dopamine acts like a chemical fixative. It strengthens the neural trace and encourages your brain to pay attention to that good feeling again in the future.
And the third step is what completes that internalization process.
Step 3 is to actively imagine or feel the experience sinking in. Visualize it, like warm sunshine soaking into a pea-shirt or a jewel being placed securely in a treasure chest in your heart. This conscious act is what begins the conversion of that temporary mental state into a permanent neural trait.
Let's push on the technical implication here. We're talking about using this to heal pain, using memory machinery, specifically something called memory reconsolidation. My question is, if I have a deeply upsetting memory and I try to infuse it with a positive feeling, am I just practicing denial? Am I just suppressing the bad feeling?
That is a critical question.
Yeah.
And no, you are doing something fundamentally different from suppression. Suppression is ignoring the painful memory, which just pushes it into the unconscious where it festers.
So what's different about reconsolidation?
Memory reconsolidation works because when a memory is activated, it becomes temporarily plastic again. For about an hour while that memory is alive, your brain is preparing to restore it.
Yeah.
If you introduce a strong, beneficial, concurrent, positive experience during that window,
You're changing the memory itself.
you're literally weaving that positive material, a feeling of comfort, safety, closeness, into the fabric of the old memory before it gets restored.
So an example would be, if I recall an upsetting memory from my childhood, and at the same time I recall the deeply felt physical sensation of being safe with someone who loves me, I'm essentially editing the emotional charge of the original memory.
You are editing the emotional charge before it goes back into long-term storage.
Exactly. You're diminishing its sting synapse by synapse. You're not erasing the fact of what happened, but you are changing your relationship to it. Every time you consciously do this, you build a positive neural structure that actively buffers against the pain of that old memory.
This moves us so beautifully into the realm of relationships, because love is perhaps the most powerful force for positive neuroplasticity there is.
It absolutely is. The sources stress that evolution has bred the wolf of love to be more central to our human nature than the wolf of hate. The development of social capabilities was the primary factor driving the enormous increase in brain size over millions of years.
You can see the evidence, right? Clearly. In vertebrates, raising young and forming pair bonds required significantly more neural processing than, say, a solitary reptile needs. A squirrel has to be smarter than a lizard to navigate social interaction and parental care.
And this just accelerates dramatically in primates.
It does. Primates are highly sociable, and there's a direct correlation. The more sociable the primate species, the larger its cortex is relative to the rest of its brain. Furthermore, great apes and humans develop these unique neurons called spindle cells
Where are they located?
in the cingulate cortex and the insula, and they seem to be dedicated to advanced social capabilities like empathy and consolation.
And then came the explosion in human brain size. It tripled in 3 million years, and we dedicated massive resources to social, emotional, and linguistic processing.
Which suggests that things like altruism, generosity, forgiveness, fairness, these are not just nice cultural ideas, they're woven into our neural underpinnings.
Because they helped us survive.
They did. Cooperation, large-scale groups, complex communication, all fueled by love and attachment, were necessary for hunter-gatherer survival and reproductive success. The social reward system is evolution's most effective carrot.
And the mechanism for all this social ability lies in the circuits of empathy. They rely on 3 neural systems that simulate the experience of others.
First, the simulation of actions, which uses mirror neurons. These neurons fire both when you perform an action, like picking up a cup, and when you see someone else perform that same action. It gives you an immediate felt sense of what it's like to be doing what they're doing.
Second is the simulation of emotions.
Right. The insula and linked circuits activate both when you feel a strong emotion like disgust or excitement, and when you see someone else having that feeling.
Which is why self-awareness is so critical for empathy, isn't it?
It's the foundation. The more aware you are of your own physical and emotional body states, your own felt experience of safety or agitation, the better primed you are to accurately read and feel into the experience of others.
And the third system simulates thoughts.
Yes, or theory of mind. This involves prefrontal and temporal lobe structures that let us explicitly think about the inner world of another person, their beliefs, their intentions, their perspective.
Building on that foundation of empathy, we can then actively cultivate compassion and kindness.
And it's useful to distinguish the two. Compassion is the wish that other beings not suffer. Kindness or loving kindness is the wish that they be happy. Kindness is a universal benevolence that extends to everyone, even people who are already doing well.
And we can strengthen these compassion circuits through intentional practice. The sources suggest recalling the feeling of being loved, which activates that deep attachment system.
And then extending that feeling of empathy to anyone who is suffering, offering explicit wishes. May you be free from suffering.
The ultimate goal being that this compassion becomes universal or non-referential, not dependent on a specific target, but just a pervasive default state of benevolence.
It reinforces the wisdom that we are all fundamentally interconnected.
Which brings us to the acid test of compassion, turning ill will to goodwill, especially toward those who have wronged us.
This is probably the hardest practice of all, but it's essential for freeing yourself from resentment. The analogy of the gorilla and the hunter is perfect here.
I love this story.
It's a powerful one. A gorilla rescues a hunter, but the hunter then turns around and tries to kill the gorilla for food. The gorilla's response to being injured is not rage, but deep sorrow. He says, "Poor man, now you'll never be happy."
That is just such a profound perspective shift. The gorilla recognizes that the man's action, his willingness to harm someone who just helped him, is its own punishment. The man's internal moral suffering is far worse than the gorilla's physical injury.
And recognizing that shift frees the gorilla and us from the toxic need for retribution or hatred. It allows us to apply specific strategies to tame the wolf of hate.
The first one is to practice non-contention.
Yes. This means refusing to get swirled up by the mind stream of others. If someone is aggressive or hostile, you see their outburst not as a personal attack, but as impersonal neurological turbulence, like spray coming off a waterfall. You don't have to step into that flow.
Second, be cautious about attributing intentions. When someone acts poorly, our brain automatically jumps to the worst conclusion. They did that specifically to hurt me.
But so often people are just acting from their own distress, their own ignorance, their own past conditioning. They're like logs floating down a river that randomly bump into your canoe. They're not aiming at you.
This is where the 10,000 things exercise comes in.
Exactly. When someone acts poorly, you pause and reflect on all the upstream causes that led them to that moment. Their biology, their life history, their stressors, the context of their day. Understanding the 10,000 things that conspired to make them act that way naturally fosters compassion and softens your judgment.
Third strategy is forgiveness.
Which doesn't mean condoning what happened. It means letting go of the emotional charge around feeling wronged. We hold on to resentment because we think it punishes the other person.
But it only poisons us.
The greatest beneficiary of your forgiveness is almost always you, because you release yourself from that corrosive HPA activation caused by chronic anger.
And fourth, expanding the circle of us.
The brain has powerful automatic mechanisms for categorization, us versus them. As soon as you categorize someone as them, your brain begins to devalue that person. So we must actively and mindfully extend the sense of us to include everyone, even difficult people. It reinforces the neural truth that we are all one in our shared suffering and our shared desire for happiness. #TAG-V, wisdom, attention, and relaxing the self.
So if love and compassion are the active ingredients for rewiring the brain, wisdom is the foundation that allows them to take root. And wisdom is built on mindfulness, which is built on sustained attention.
That's the progression. And attention itself relies on 3 core neural functions. First, holding information in awareness. That's your working memory. Second, filtering out distractions. And third, managing the deep evolutionary desire for stimulation, which is what kept our ancestors seeking food and mates.
And this desire for stimulation is managed by the dopamine gate. Explain how this works, because it seems vital for understanding why we all struggle so much to focus in our modern digital world.
It's key. Dopamine regulates the gate to your working memory. A steady, predictable stream of dopamine keeps that gate closed, which allows you to maintain focused concentration on your task.
Right.
But a sudden decrease in stimulation boredom, or a sudden spike from a new opportunity or threat, A notification on your phone opens that gate, flooding your system with new information. And that's distraction.
So every time we check our phone or switch tasks during deep work, we are feeding that dopamine spike. We're training the gate to open more and more easily.
You're actively wiring your brain for continuous distraction.
So to promote attention, we need mindfulness practices that are explicitly designed to steady that dopamine flow and quiet the mind.
One very effective method is whole body awareness. Instead of focusing on one thing, you broaden your attention to the overall feeling, the gestalt of your entire body.
And how does that quiet the mind?
Whole body awareness preferentially stimulates your right hemisphere, which handles holistic nonverbal spatial processing. And through a process called reciprocal inhibition, increased activity in the right hemisphere naturally dampens the frantic verbal chatter that's centered in the left hemisphere. It creates immediate psychological space.
Another technique is much more direct. It involves just giving an instruction to our internal dialogue.
Yes, to hush the verbal centers. The prefrontal cortex can send a gentle, non-aggressive instruction to the verbal centers. Hush now. It's time to be quiet. It's not about fighting your thoughts, but simply asserting the intention for quiet focus.
And the ultimate goal of all this, particularly in deep meditation, is described as abiding as awareness itself.
This is the realization that awareness itself, the simple capacity to register mental and physical objects, is boundless, still, silent, and completely unaffected by the thoughts, feelings, or sensations that pass through it. It's like the screen on which the mental movie is being played.
The screen isn't damaged by a scary movie.
Exactly. Resting in that realization brings a profound, unconditional sense of inner clarity and peace that is inherently non-reactive.
This stability is actively deepened through what's called blissful concentration, which in contemplative traditions is broken down into the jnana factors. What are the neural substrates we're reinforcing here?
We are training the brain to hold focus, step by step. The first two factors are mechanics. Applied attention, which is directing your focus, like to the beginning of the breath, and sustained attention, which is staying with that object, like the entire duration of the inhalation and exhalation.
And then the rewards kick in, which reinforces the practice.
That's right. The third factor is rapture intense, physical, often blissful sensations that arise as a reward for sustained focus. The fourth is joy, a deep gladdening of the heart that feels profound and stabilizing.
These act as powerful, natural dopamine rewards for maintaining attention,
making the practice self-reinforcing. And the final factor is singleness of mind, a total unification of awareness, which is often associated with the high-frequency gamma waves we see in the brains of long-term practitioners. It reflects a highly integrated and unified neural function.
This whole journey of transformation is not instant, though. It requires dedication, and the sources highlight the 4 stages of skill development, which I find very encouraging.
They are. We all start at unconscious incompetence. We don't know what we don't know. Then we move to conscious incompetence, which is the hardest stage.
This is where we realize just how hijacked we are by our old negative patterns, the greed, the hatred, the self-criticism, but we don't have the skill yet to stop it. This is where most people quit, right?
It is, the moment they realize how deep the conditioning goes. But this realization is actually a sign of massive progress. You can't change what you can't see.
So you have to push through that pain.
You have to acknowledge the pain of incompetence and just keep practicing until you reach conscious competence. You have the skill, but it requires effort. And then finally, unconscious competence, where the positive trait becomes automatic. It's the law of little things, lots of small, intentional moments of practice that gradually replace suffering with happiness.
And all of this practice, all of this wisdom ultimately directs us to what our sources call the single greatest source of human suffering, the illusion of self.
The paradox is stunning. When you relax that subtle, constant sense of I, you instantly feel more peaceful and fulfilled. The self mobilizes when we feel threatened or when we identify with things that are transient. No self, no problem.
Neurologically, the everyday feeling of having a unified, self-sum, stable entity running the show is indeed an illusion. We are not having a coherent self. We are constantly doing the process of self-neaving, fabricated from many disparate neural subsystems and moments of subjectivity.
Right. And it's a subtle point.
Yeah.
The self-related representations, the patterns of information about your history, your preferences, your identity, those are absolutely real. They exist in your brain and are crucial for you to function.
But what they point to?
What they point to, a unified, independent, unchanging owner of all your experiences, that's unreal.
Yeah.
It's like a mythical unicorn. The self is just a useful, continually constructed narrative, not a solid entity.
Let's break down the 4 neural aspects of self that contribute to this illusion.
First, the autobiographical self, which gives us our sense of a unique history and future. That relies on the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. Second is the core self, which is the nonverbal moment-to-moment sense of I that's tied deeply to subcortical and brainstem structures that manage regulation. Third is the self as object, which activates when we consciously think about ourselves, relying on midline cortical structures. And fourth is the self as subject. This is the elemental sense of being the experiencer of it all, which arises from the body's engagement with the world.
But the key wisdom here is that awareness doesn't actually require a subject.
It doesn't. The elemental feeling of I is just the brain indexing across all these disparate moments of subjectivity to fabricate an apparent subject. When we realize the self is just a collection of real representations of an unreal being, we can start to relieve the massive tension we pour into defending and preserving it.
So how do we use this wisdom to relieve the self in practice?
First, we can release identification. We stop equating ourself with transient things by inquiring, am I this hand? Am I this belief? Am I this job title? The answer is always no. Releasing identification with things that will inevitably pass away reduces the suffering caused by impermanence.
Second is generosity.
The self is often described as a knotted fist, tight, grasping, anxious. When you open your hand to give, your time, your patience, forgiveness, resources, the fist of the self is temporarily gone. It's a powerful antidote to possessiveness and pride.
And third, practice healthy humility.
This is not about being a doormat. It's about renouncing the exhaustive, anxious work of needing to be special or important. It's incredibly peaceful to let go of the ego's demands. We can affirm the wish, may I be loved without having to be special.
Beautiful.
And finally, we have to actively be good to yourself by filling that hole in the heart. The self mobilizes most strongly when we feel fundamentally unsupported or threatened. By intentionally taking in the good brick by brick, we build internal resources of self-worth and safety, so we no longer need to desperately look for external validation to prove that we are okay.
We have spent a long time discussing how the mind changes the brain, but we have to remember that the brain is a physical thing. It's made of molecules derived entirely from the food we eat.
It's the substrate. Physical intervention through nutrition supports and accelerates all these mental practices. You can't separate them.
So let's look at the diet basics. First, we need to focus on high-quality fuel. What does the neuroscientific literature suggest?
Prioritize protein and vegetables. Protein, a palm-sized portion at every meal, provides the amino acid building blocks for all of our neurotransmitters, and we should aim for at least 3 cups of vegetables daily.
And our sources specifically call out berries.
They do. Berries, like blueberries, are profoundly beneficial for the brain. They help reverse age-related cognitive decline because of their powerful antioxidant content.
And what must we minimize or avoid?
Sugar, without question. High blood sugar causes rapid wear and tear on the hippocampus, that structure that's essential for memory and, as we discussed, for inhibiting stress. Impaired glucose tolerance is strongly linked to cognitive impairment.
So we need to ruthlessly avoid refined sugars and refined flour products like white bread and cookies.
Ruthlessly. And we also have to consider inflammation.
And the connection between food and inflammation.
Chronic inflammation, even if it's mild and systemic, is a profound enemy of the brain. It disrupts neural communication and can exacerbate anxiety and depression.
Right.
We have to identify and avoid common dietary allergens.
The top culprits being?
Often cow's milk, gluten grains like wheat, barley, and rye, and soy. Just eliminating those for a trial period can lead to noticeable improvements in digestion, energy, and overall brain function.
Okay, now let's turn to some key supplements that directly feed the neural substrate. We have to start with omega-3s. Why are these fats so essential?
The brain is about 60% fat by dry weight, and omega-3s, particularly DHA, are essential components of the cellular membranes. They keep the brain fluid and efficient. We should be aiming for at least 500 milligrams of DHA daily.
And you can get that from molecularly distilled fish oil, which minimizes toxins.
Exactly, and the research specifically links DHA to fighting cognitive decline, correct?
It does. DHA intake increases the expression of a protein called SORLLR11, and reduced expression of that protein is strongly correlated with Alzheimer's disease.
And for those who are vegetarian or vegan.
Supplementing with 500 milligrams of algae-derived DHA is highly recommended, as plant-based sources like flaxseed often don't convert efficiently enough in the body to meet the brain's needs.
Okay. We also need cofactors to build our neurotransmitters. And that brings us to the B vitamins.
B12 and folate are essential cofactors in the methylation cycle, which is necessary for synthesizing every single major neurotransmitter. Low B12, for example, is strongly linked to brain volume loss, particularly in the elderly. Ensuring you have adequate B vitamin status is just foundational for supporting mood and energy.
Finally, let's look at direct support for neurotransmitter production, starting with serotonin. This is the key chemical for feeling satisfied, calm, and happy.
Serotonin is synthesized through a specific pathway. Tryptophan converts to 5-HTP, which then converts to serotonin. To make that process work, you need adequate iron and vitamin B6, specifically the P5P form, as cofactors.
And if someone's primary issue is mood feeling generally blue or dissatisfied,
Supplementing with 5-HTP, maybe 50 to 200 milligrams in the morning, can most directly boost serotonin levels. However, if the main concern is insomnia, taking L-tryptophan, maybe 500 to 1,500 milligrams before bed, is preferred. It acts more gently and supports the sleep process.
how about the excitatory neurotransmitters, norepinephrine and dopamine, which support our energy, motivation, and attention?
These are built from another pathway, L-phenylalanine to L-tyrosine, then to dopamine, and then to norepinephrine. So if you struggle with energy, alertness, or focus, supplementing with L-tyrosine is the most direct route to increasing these neurotransmitters.
But there's a catch.
There is. It must be taken on an empty stomach to be effective, and you have to start at very low doses, around 500 milligrams or even less, to gauge your tolerance. Too much can cause agitation or anxiety. #tag7, outro.
This deep dive has spanned the entire cosmos of complexity, from that idea of 10 to the millionth power of brain states, all the way down to the exact molecules needed for a single neuron to fire. We started by recognizing the brain's fundamental capacity for change neuroplasticity, affirming that our mental activity truly does sculpt our neural structure.
We then diagnosed suffering as the inevitable consequence of those ancient but now flawed evolutionary survival strategies. The three flaws, the negativity bias, and the chronic anxiety of the simulator.
And crucially, we identify the second darts, our own reactions, as the primary source of our misery, a misery catalyzed by the SNSHPAA system.
And then we established the profound path to the cure. You possess the tools to actively sculpt your brain toward greater well-being, from simple physical interventions like long exhalations to activate the PNS and targeted nutritional support,
To conscious mental practices like savoring positive experiences with the HEAL framework and cultivating boundless kindness, feeding that powerful evolutionary wolf of love.
The ultimate wisdom, it seems, lies in realizing that the self is a fabricated illusion. A functional narrative, yes, but not a solid, enduring entity. By relaxing our grasp on that manufactured I, we release the single biggest source of anxiety, contraction, and fear of loss, opening the door to unconditional peace.
So if every moment of mental activity sculpts your brain and you cannot control the past or the present, it can only accept all that as it is, what small, humble practice will you commit to tending today to build the causes of a better future? Will you take one full exhalation in a tense meeting, or perhaps take in just one good thing before you go to sleep tonight, ensuring that tiny moment of positivity sinks in and begins to rewire your implicit memory for tomorrow? The choice and all that potential rests in your next breath.